but he never lived there. He never even stepped foot there. Vlad III's father, Vlad II, did own a residence in Sigsaurora, Transylvania, but it is not certain that Vlad III was born there, according to Kurta. It's also possible, he said, that Vlad the Impaler was born in Toskovistye, which at the time was the royal seat of the Principality of Wallachia, where his father was Vodevode, or ruler. It is possible for tourists to visit one castle where Vlad III certainly spent time. At about age 12, Vlad III and his brother were imprisoned in Turkey. In 2014, archaeologists found the likely location of the dungeon, according to Smithsonian Magazine. Tokat Castle is located in northern Turkey. It is an eerie place with secret tunnels and dungeons. It is currently under restoration and open to the public. Now, I'm curious. I'd like to see a picture of Tokat Castle.
Yeah, I would too.
Tokat?
Right?
Tokat Castle, yes. Here we go. What do you know? Got an image right here. Let me pull it up.
He's got such a dapper outfit, but the eyes, they scream for me.
Girls.
Oh, that's such a small image. That's absolutely useless for my purposes here. Rather small, but I'm going to go with it.
Okay.
So there we go. This doesn't really give you a great impression of it, but as you can see, it's a hilltop castle. There's still some of the foundations standing, some of these towers, of course.
Nice.
In a good spot.
Yeah.
Right?
Probably
That's
a
a
great
pain in the
defensive
butt to
position.
hack.
Yeah. That's what I put into position.
Plus, too, you know, people trying to escape, they either got one way to run down the hill,
That's right.
right into waiting forces, and if they try and scale the hill, well, they're moving slow enough where they can be shot with arrows or have rocks dropped on them.
Yeah.
Now, this painting that we're looking at here is titled Vlad the Impaler and the Turkish Envoys by Theodore Aman. Between 1831 and 1891 he lived, and it allegedly depicts a scene in which Vlad III nailed the turbans of these Ottoman diplomats to their heads.
My conspiracy brain is going crazy right now.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Fed? Got the Masonic flooring and the pillars, the twin pillars.
But yeah, I think that's funny. He's like, oh, you're gonna come up into my court? Here, whack!
Right?
That brings us to the Order of the Dragon. In 1431, King Sigismund of Hungary, who would later become the Holy Roman Emperor, inducted the elder Vlad into a knightly order, the Order of the Dragon. This designation earned Vlad II a new surname, Dracul. The name came from the old Romanian word for the dragon, Drac. His son Vlad III would later be known as the son of Dracul, or in Old Romanian, Dracula, hence Dracula. In modern Romanian, the word Drac refers to another feared creature, the devil, Kurta said. According to Dracula's Sense and Nonsense by Elizabeth Miller, in 1890 Stoker read a book about Wallachia. Although it did not mention Vlad III, Stoker was struck by the word Dracula. He wrote in his notes, in the Wallachian language means devil. It is therefore likely that Stoker chose to name his character Dracula for the word's devilish associations. The theory that Vlad III and Dracula were the same person was developed and popularized by historians Radu Florescu and Raymond T. McNally in their 1972 book, In Search of Dracula. Though far from accepted by all historians, the thesis took hold of the public imagination. According to the New York Times, the Order of the Dragon was devoted to a singular task, the defeat of the Turkish or Ottoman Empire, situated between Christian Europe and the Muslim lands of the Ottoman Empire. Vlad II, and later Vlad III's home Principality of Wallachia, was frequently the scene of bloody battles as Ottoman forces pushed westward into Europe and Christian forces repulsed the invaders. Now, when Vlad II was called to a diplomatic meeting in 1442 with Ottoman Sultan Murad II, he brought his young sons Vlad III and Radu along, but the meeting was actually a trap. All three were arrested and held hostage. The elder Vlad was released under the condition that he leave his sons behind. The Sultan held Vlad and his brother as hostages to ensure that their father, Vlad II, behaved himself in the ongoing war between Turkey and Hungary, said Miller, a research historian and professor emeritus at Memorial University of Newfoundland in Canada. Under the Ottomans, Vlad and his younger brother were tutored in science, philosophy, and the arts. Vlad also became a skilled horseman and warrior. According to Radu Florescu and Raymond McNally, former professors of history at Boston College, who wrote several books about Vlad III, as well as his alleged connection to Stoker's Dracula in the 70s and 80s. They were treated reasonably well by the current standards of the time, Miller said. Still, captivity irked Vlad, whereas his brother sort of acquiesced and went over to the Turkish side. But Vlad held enmity, and I think it was one of his motivating factors for fighting the Turks, to get even with them for having held him captive. Now, when Vlad and Radu were in Ottoman hands, Vlad's father was fighting to keep his place as voivode of Wallachia, a fight he would eventually lose. In 1447, Vlad II was ousted as ruler of Wallachia by a local nobleman and was killed in the swamps near Baltieni, halfway between Targoviste and Bucharest, present-day Romania. Vlad's older half-brother, Mircea, was killed alongside his father. Not long after these harrowing events, in 1448, Vlad embarked on a campaign to regain his father's seat from the new ruler, Vladislav II. His first attempts at the throne relied on the military support of the Ottoman governors of the cities along the Danube River in northern Bulgaria, according to Curtin. Vlad also took advantage of the fact that Vladislav was absent at the time, having gone to the Balkans to fight the Ottomans for the governor of Hungary, John Hunyadi. Vlad won back his father's seat, but his time as ruler of Wallachia was short-lived. He was deposed after only 2 months. When Vladislav II returned and took back the throne of Wallachia with the assistance of Hunyadi, according to Kurta. Little is known about Vlad III's whereabouts between 1448 and 1456, but it is known that he switched sides in the Ottoman-Hungarian conflict, giving up his ties with the Ottoman governors of the Danube cities and obtaining military support from King Ladislav V of Hungary, who happened to dislike Vlad's rival, Vladislav II of Wallachia. Vlad III's political and military tact truly came to the forefront amid the fall of Constantinople in 1453. After the fall, the Ottomans were in a position to invade all of Europe. Vlad, who had already solidified his anti-Ottoman position, was proclaimed voivode of Wallachia in 1456, and one of his first orders of business in his new role was to stop paying annual tribute to the Ottoman Sultan, a measure that had formerly ensured peace between Wallachia and the Ottomans. To consolidate his power, Vlad needed to quell the incessant conflicts that had historically taken place between the Wallachia's boyars, noblemen. According to legends that circulated after his death, Vlad invited 100 of these boyars to a banquet, and knowing they would challenge his authority, had his guests stabbed and their still twitching bodies impaled on spikes. And I believe we do have an image of a woodcut depicting old Vlad dining at a table as his enemies writhe on pikes around.
For real,
Yeah, it was a
red
hell of a
wedding.
party. Pretty good. Yeah, before the red wedding, ladies and gentlemen, there was this.
Lovely scenery.
Yeah! It definitely was a hell of a party. But much screaming.
Oh, could you imagine that though? All those people like writhing there, like slowly dying and everything, and you're just sitting there looking them all in the eye as you just cut your steak and eat it all nice and calm, like, yeah, what? You guys thought you were gonna win?
Yeah.
Did you forget there's always somebody way crazier than the rest of you?
Got that right. These people loved him though.
Oh yeah, he didn't fucking put up with any shit.
Nope. Got
He's
that
like,
right.
System scan complete.
do
I'm
what I
thinking
say,
about-
I'll give you paradise.
I'm just thinking about all the flies and the stank. Oh, it must have been horrific.
Oh yeah, but you pull those off, bury them in the fields, and
Mhm.
plant corn on top of them. You'll have great crops next year.
Think about it. Oh my god.
Oh,
my God.
damn. That's what we talk about fertilizer, ladies and gentlemen, in the new dystopian future coming soon to theater near you.
Hey man, put them to good use.
This was just one of the many gruesome events that earned Vlad his posthumous nickname, Vlad the Impaler. This story, and others like it, is documented in printed material from around the time of Vlad III's rule, according to Miller. In the 1460s and 1470s, just after the invention of the printing press, a lot of these stories about Vlad were circulating orally, and then they were put together by different individuals in pamphlets and printed. Whether or not these stories are wholly true or significantly embellished is debatable. After all, many of those printing the pamphlets were hostile to Vlad III, but some of the pamphlets from this time tell almost the exact same gruesome stories about Vlad, leading Miller to believe that the tales are at least partially historically accurate. Some of these legends were also collected and published in a book, The Tale of Dracula, in 1490, by a monk who presented Vlad III as a fierce but just ruler. Vlad is credited with impaling dozens of Saxon merchants in Kronstadt, present-day Warsaw, Romania. They were once allied with the Boyars. In 1456, around the same time, a group of Ottoman envoys allegedly had an audience with Vlad, but declined to remove their turbans, citing a religious custom. Commending them on their religious devotion, Vlad ensured their turbans would forever remain on their heads by reportedly having their head coverings nailed to their skulls. After Mehmed II, the one who conquered Constantinople, invaded Wallachia in 1462, he actually was able to go all the way to Wallachia's capital city of Targov-Este, but found it deserted, and in front of the capital, he found the bodies of the Ottoman prisoners of war Vlad had taken, all impaled. Vlad's victories over the invading Ottomans were celebrated throughout Wallachia, Transylvania, and the rest of Europe. Even Pope Pius II was impressed. The reason he's a positive character in Romania is because he is reputed to have been just, though harsh, as a ruler. Now, not long after the impalement of the Ottoman prisoners of war, 1462, Vlad was forced into exile in Hungary, unable to defeat his much more powerful adversary, Mehmed II. Vlad was in prison for a number of years during his exile, though during that same time he married and had 2 children. Vlad's younger brother, Radu, who had sided with the Ottomans during the ongoing military campaigns, took over governance of Wallachia after his brother's imprisonment. But after Radu's death in 1475, local boyars, as well as the rulers of several nearby principalities, favored Vlad's return to power. In 1476, with the support of the Voivode of Moldavia, Stephen III the Great, who lived from 1457 to 1504, Vlad made one last effort to reclaim his seat as ruler of Wallachia. He successfully stole back the throne, but his triumph was short-lived. Later that year, while marching to yet another battle with the Ottomans, Vlad and a small vanguard of soldiers were ambushed, and Vlad was killed. There is much controversy over the location of Vlad III's tomb. It is said he was buried in a monastery church in Snagos, on the northern edge of the modern city of Bucharest, in accordance with the traditions of his time. But recently, historians have questioned whether Vlad was actually buried at the monastery of Comana, between Bucharest and the Danube, which is close to the presumed location of the battle in which Vlad was killed. One thing is for certain. Unlike Stoker's Count Dracula, Vlad III most definitely did die. Only the harrowing tales of his years as ruler of Wallachia remain to harm. So, that is the article from Live Science. I think it's a very well-written article. I think you really get a nice overview of Vlad the Impaler's life, his military struggles, and, of course, his death.
I mean, that absolutely sucks. Like, yeah, you got ambushed and taken out like a bitch in the end.
Yeah, so always take some of this with a grain of salt, because a long time ago, and the history of Dracula has changed over time, and Curtis might be wrong on a few things. Just say that.
Complete.
Or maybe just had enough. Faked his
Maybe
death
just a
and
few little
disappeared.
things he might be wrong about. Who knows? Maybe Dracula's still chilling out somewhere. Who knows?
Shift drive charging.
Well, they don't know where his body is.
Well,
I'm guessing it's in Florida.
Florida.
All the weird shit's in Florida.
or Texas, yeah. You're right.
Oh, maybe it's just for vacation, that's all. And just hang out for a little bit at certain beaches, yeah.
Let's get a
And
sun
then
tan.
by the moonlight, yeah.
Yeah, moonlight at Mar-a-Lago. There you go.
You figured his enemies would have done the same thing back to him, you know, impaled him
Yeah.
and displayed him. That's what you would figure would have happened. Who knows? Maybe it didn't.
I do have a picture of one of the possible sites of where Vlad was buried. It is Snagoff Monastery. Dracula's grave appeared suspected. Here you get a nice picture of what it looks like.
Look at
Beautiful
that.
architecture.
Beautiful.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely beautiful. Snagoff
That's,
Like,
Monastery.
yeah, like thankfully nobody had like knocked that down or didn't get bombed or anything.
I know,
Like,
Fed. It's unique.
Now there is a lake that surrounds this monastery.
Okay.
So, as it goes, this monastery has existed on Snagoff Island for a long time. It was originally founded in the 14th century, and more than one church has stood upon the island grounds in this time. Some, including a small wooden church, have been destroyed, supposedly even sinking into the surrounding lake. Because of this, many locals started to believe the island was actually cursed. During its lifetime, the Snagoff Monastery and the island it sits upon have been used for far more purposes than simple worship. Some of its past uses put a darker spin on this seemingly peaceful island. Perhaps the most famous of any legends surrounding the monastery are those related to the real-life Count Dracula, Vlad Tepes, Vlad the ruler of Wallachia, a district within Romania during the 1400s several times. He led armies against the invading Ottoman Turks and became notorious for his ruthless war tactics, which included his signature torture and execution method, impalement, largely where his name came from, Vlad the Impaler. And there's the
Frameshift drive charging.
yeah, I'll get this pulled up here just so I can share this image. This is where his grave is supposed. You can see it is marked with a little commemoration to him. While there's much mystery surrounding the death of Vlad, many believe he was beheaded at a small pond just outside of Bucharest, which has gained its own notoriety. There is equal amount of mystery surrounding his current place of rest. It is commonly thought that his remains do exist at the Snagoff Monastery, and it is certainly marketed as such to tourists, though historians are not sure of the accuracy of this claim, and his remains have never conclusively been located on the island. It was originally thought that Vlad Tepes was buried at the entrance of Snagoff Church. The thought process behind this was that Vlad committed so many atrocities during his life that placing him at the entry of the church would mean anyone entering would take some of his sins upon themselves. During the 1930s, this area was excavated and no sign of Vlad's headless torso were uncovered, just some artifacts and a number of animal bones. Many believe he was buried deeper than was excavated, or is buried in a different area of the church,
Frameshift drive
where he is marked as resting today. Some even believe he may have arisen from his grave, true to the vampire mythology that surrounds him as being the inspiration for Bram Stoker's Dracula. Snagoff was thought to be an appropriate place for Vlad's burial since he had some ties to it. There are claims that he had fortifications which surrounded the island, a torture chamber on this island, as well as a prison. Remains of a prison are apparent on the island to this day, though they were dated at a later time than Vlad would have been alive. Now you can be visited. It's a day trip outside of Bucharest. Any traveler can look for the tour of the Dracula sites and make time for them. The monastery charges a small fee to enter, take photographs, and interestingly, has a small shrine set up where Vlad's remains are said to rest. The monastery even sells a number of souvenirs, including wine. Getting to the island without a car is a bit tricky. Whilst the journey is not a difficult one, the lack of posted information and the language barrier made this harder. To get there, grab a maxi taxi from Piazza Presley Library roundabout. Tickets are cheap and can be purchased from the driver. The bus leaves frequently. The bus will drop you off a short walkable distance from the monastery. Make sure to confirm with the driver when the bus returns to Bucharest so you don't miss the last one of the day. And this all comes from Amy's Crypt, which is a very nice blog I would definitely recommend people check out here. amyscrypt.com. Lots of haunted places to see on her site.
System scan complete.
And she's got plenty of photographs of her own trip to
Frameshift drive charging.
So definitely something to check out. She also has a YouTube channel with 99,000 subscribers. If you're interested in checking it
Nice.
out. Let me see what the name of the channel is.
Also, one of the live science articles you can see at the bottom talks about Dracula's homepage, and one little part there they talk about Dr. Elizabeth Miller, who's an actual expert on the subject of both Dracula and Vlad the Impaler. It seems, so you can get her take on the subject.
System scan.
Maybe it's a little more accurate than Curtis. Let's just say Curtis may have made some money on the side off his history with Vlad the Impaler.
Yeah, Dracula's homepage I do recommend. I'm on it right now. It's a great resource for both Dracula and Vlad the Impaler, which gives me a moment here. I wanted to really get into this because they have a page here on the Order of the Dragon, which is part of the Dracula myth that really captivates me. The name is pretty kick-ass.
Oh yeah.
Consider these were knights,
Frameshift drive charging.
an order of knights called the Order of the Dragon. That's pretty badass. But the Order of the Dragon, Societas Draconis Drio, was an institution similar to other chivalric orders of the time. Modeled on the Order of St. George, which was founded in 1318, it was created in 1408 by the Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund, while he was still King of Hungary, and his queen Barbara Cilli, mainly for the purpose of gaining protection for the royal family. According to its statute, which survives in a copy dated 1707, the order also required its initiates to defend the cross and to do battle against its enemies, principally the Turks. The original order consisted of 24 members of the nobility, including such notable figures as King Alfonso of Aragon and Naples and Stefan Lazarevic of Serbia. In 1431, Sigismund summoned to the city of Nuremberg a number of princes and vassals that he considered useful for both political and military alliances. His primary objective was to initiate the group into the Order of the Dragon. One of these was Vlad II, father of Vlad the Impaler, a claimant for the throne of the Principality of Wallachia, now part of modern Romania, who was at the time serving in Sighisoara as frontier commander guarding the mountain passes from Transylvania into Wallachia from enemy incursion. While at Nuremberg, Vlad also received Sigismund's pledge to support his claim to the throne of Wallachia, but it would be another 5 years before that ambition could be realized. The Order of the Dragon adopted as its symbol in 1408 the image of a circular dragon with its tail coiled around its neck. On its back, from the base of its neck to his tail, was the red cross of St. George on the background of a silver field. With the expansion of the order, other symbols were adopted, all variations on the theme of dragon and cross. For example, one class of the order used a dragon being strangled with a cross draped across its back. Another presented a cross perpendicular to a coiled-up dragon with the inscription O quam miscuris est Deus vertically, and Justus Espasianus horizontal. Other emblems of the order included a necklace and a seal, each with the form of the dragon motif. Now I'm curious as to what this Latin says here, so if you don't mind, I'm going to take a minute to translate it here with this fancy translator. Oh, how merciful is the first inscription, and Justus et Pasina translates to just and patient. So it says, oh, how merciful, just, and patient on the emblem. Now, Vlad was obviously proud of this achievement. Later, he had coins minted, which showed on one side a winged dragon. His personal coat of arms also incorporated a dragon. In all these cases, the dragon was intended to convey a favorable image drawn from medieval iconography in which the dragon represents the beast of Revelation, who was slain by the forces of good. Vlad took the nickname Dracul in reference to his induction into the order. The word Dracul has its origins in the Latin Draco, meaning the dragon. His son, Vlad the Impaler, used the sobriquet Dracula in the context of son of Dracul, or son of he who was a member of the Order of the Dragon. Once again, it was used as a term of honor. On a number of occasions, Vlad the Impaler signed documents using this name. The word Dracul, however, took on a second meaning, the devil, which was applied to members of the Dracula family by their enemies, and possible also by superstitious peasants. It was this second meaning that found its way into William Wilkinson's An Account on the Principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia from 1820, the book in which Bram Stoker found the name Dracula. There's no evidence whatsoever that Stoker knew about the Order of the Dragon. After the death of Sigismund in 1437, the Order of the Dragon lost much of its prominence, though its iconography was retained on the coat of arms of several noble families. So that's a little info on the Order of the Dragon. Oh, and that does bring us to the halfway point of the show. While we're here at the halfway point, I do want to take a minute to plug our sponsor, My Patriot Supply. You know, a famous movie villain once said, if you introduce a little anarchy and upset the established order, everything becomes chaos. And truer words have rarely been spoken. History demonstrates this truth repeatedly. Stock market crashes, terror attacks, or even if the power goes off longer than you expect. And these things happen without warning. When it's breaking news, it's too late to prepare, and you'll find yourself in a panic scramble. To avoid that chaos, there's one thing you should do. Build an emergency food supply. Now, I trust and use My Patriot Supply for this purpose. Getting started with a 2-week food kit, you can save 40% this week when you go to my special website, preparewithpeter.com. These kits include breakfast, lunches, and dinners that last up to 25 years in storage, and they arrive fast at your door with a guaranteed 2-day delivery. Those that know what's coming are preparing today, and you should too. So go to preparewithpeter.com and save 40% right now. That's preparewithpeter.com. You'll find a link to that down in the description of this video. Thank you very much to our sponsor, My Patriot Supply. So there's another article in here that I'd like to get to. This is a little more lengthy, but I think we've got the time left. Filing for divorce, Count Dracula versus Vlad Tepes. From Dracula, The Shade and the Shadow, by Elizabeth Miller, Westcliff on the Sea, Desert Island Books, 1998. Chapter 18 of Dracula, Van Helsing says this of the Count. He must indeed been that Vovu, Dracula, who won his name against the Turk over the great river on the very frontier of Turkeyland. Very little attention was paid to the possible connection between the fictional Count and his historical namesake until 1972, when Radu Floresco and Raymond T. McNally, in search of Dracula, revealed to the world the story of the real Dracula, Vlad Tepes. This was closely followed by McNally's discovery at the Rosenbach Museum, and guess where that is, right here in Philadelphia. And it acquired Stoker's working papers for Dracula, which proved conclusively that he did not know the existence of the Voivode Dracula. Dracula studies have not been the same since. Using this initial finding of Floresco and McNally, some of which two historians have since revised, many enthusiasts have championed tenuous connections between Count Dracula and Vlad, to the point where it has become increasingly difficult to separate fact from hypothesis. It's become commonplace to assume that Stoker was inspired by accounts of the Impaler's atrocities and deliberately modeled his Dracula on the life of the character of Vlad. This has resulted in some fanciful and at times ludicrous statements that Dracula was the reshaping of 4 centuries of folk legends that had accredited around the historical Wallachian warlord prince Vlad Tepes. That much of the story of Count Dracula was drawn from the ghastly doings of the Hungarian Prince Vlad, who was a remote ancestor of Attila the Hun. That the historical Dracula's abandonment of his Orthodox faith resulted in his becoming the subject of punishment by Orthodox priests who publicly laid the curse of vampirism on him. That the city of Bucharest was first mentioned in a document dated 1459 and signed Vlad Tepes, Count Dracula. And the first reported vampires were real historical figures, Elizabeth of Bathory and Vlad the Impaler. But it's time to put such claims to rest. Investigations into possible connections between the Count and the Voivode began before the publication of In Search of Dracula. In 1958, Vakil Kirtley said that unquestionably, the historical past that Van Helsing assigns to the fictional vampire Dracula is that of Vlad Tepes, Voivode of Wallachia. In 1962, Stoker's first biographer, Harry Ludlam, asserted that Stoker had discovered that the Voivode Dracula, or Dracula, had earned for himself the title of the Impaler, and that the story of his ferocity and hair-raising cruelty in defiance of the Turks was related at length in 2 15th century manuscripts, one which spoke of him as a vampire. In 1966, Grigory Nandris connected the vampire Dracula with the historical figure, even claiming that available portraits of Vlad were adapted by Bram Stoker to suit his literary purpose. Building on these obscure references to a possible connection, Florescu and McNally embarked on a quest of their own, the results of which were published in Search of Dracula, 1972, revised in 1994. While their historical research was thorough and well documented, the two authors speculated that the author of Dracula knew quite a bit about the historical figure, and that his sources included Arminius Vambry, a Hungarian professor whom he met at least on 2 occasions, and various readings found at the British Museum. But is this the case? Exactly what is the connection between the Count and the Voivode? For the answer, we must go to 2 sources, the reliability of which cannot be questioned: Stoker's notes at the Rosenbach Museum and the novel itself. We know from Stoker's notes that in March of 1890, he had decided to write a vampire novel. In fact, he had already selected a name for this vampire, Count Vampire. They're also certain that Stoker found the name Dracula, most likely for the first time, in a book he borrowed from the Whitby Public Library in the summer of 1890, an account on the principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia, written in 1820 by William Wilkinson. Stoker not only recorded the call number of the book, but copied almost verbatim key passages. This is what Wilkinson wrote. Wallachia continued to pay its tribute until the year 1444, when Ladislas, king of Hungary, preparing to make war against the Turks, engaged the Voivode Dracula to form an alliance with him. The Hungarian troops marched through the principality and were joined by 4,000 Wallachians under the command of Dracula's son. And later, their Voivode, also named Dracula, did not remain satisfied with the mere prudent measures of defense. With an army, he crossed the Danube and attacked the few Turkish troops that were stationed in his neighborhood. But this attempt, like those of his predecessors, was only attended with momentary success. Mahomet, having turned his arms against him, drove him back to Wallachia. Whither he pursued and defeated him, the Voivode escaped into Hungary, and the Sultan caused his brother, Baldus, to be named in his place. The name Dracula appears just 3 times, 2 of which more accurately refer to the father, Vlad Dracul. What attracted Stoker was a footnote attached to the 3rd occurrence. Dracula, in the Wallachian language, means devil. The Wallachians were at the time, as they are at present, used to giving this as a surname to any person who rendered himself conspicuous either by courage, cruel actions, or cunning. That Stoker considered this important is evident in that he copied into his own notes Dracula, in Wallachian language means devil. The 3 references to Dracula in Wilkinson's text, along with the footnote, are the only occurrences of this name in all the sources we know that Stoker consulted. Now, I'm curious, before I continue here, if whether or not the Rosenbach still has the manuscripts from Stoker. Let's see. Let's take a quick look at their current exhibitions. Okay. American Voyager, Herman Melville at 200. Diversity, the American Experiment. Off the shelf, game on. At your wits, giant game board. As you learn more about the Rosenbach's famous acquisitions. From the Bay Psalms book and the Ulysses manuscript to Dracula's notes. So it looks like they're still there. Oh, it looks like they got a Gothic monster. They had a past exhibition, Frankenstein and Dracula. That ran from 2017 to 2018. Did not know about that. Gothic monsters and modern science. Real shame missing that one. Real shame. Did not know. Was unaware. I should follow these people on their social media sites, see what's coming up.
Yeah, man, you ever run across any of these creatures in the wild, you need to know how to deal with them.
Oh, absolutely.
Be like, I'm sorry, I see a vampire, that's their ass, not mine.
Well, exactly. They're quite scary sometimes.
Yep.
A little bit. Sure.
Sorry, DJ D. We're cool, but
Hey,
you ever look at me
I'm
with
only
those red
half.
eyes?
I'm only half. This is somehow sexist. I don't know.
Yeah, shit, dude, you ever look at me like a tasty lamb chop? Sorry.
Yeah, but who doesn't love the taste of pussy? I mean, cat. Sure.
System scan.
Sure.
The Stoker's debt to Wilkinson is generally acknowledged, but a number of points are often overlooked. Wilkinson refers only to Dracula and Voivode, never Vlad and never Vlad Tepes or the Impaler. Furthermore, there's no specific reference to his atrocities. It is no mere coincidence that the same information applies to the text of Dracula. Yet the popular theory is that Stoker knew much more than what he read in Wilkinson's, that his major sources were Hungarian professor Arminius Vambry and his readings in the British Museum. In Personal Reminiscences of Henry Irving in 1906, Stoker gave a brief account of 2 meetings with Vambry. There's nothing to indicate that the topic of Dracula ever came up. Stoker does tell us, however, that Henry Irving was present at that first meeting, a meal that followed a performance of the play The Dead Heart. It is not more likely that the dinner conversation focused on the play, considering Irving's overpowering personality, on his performance. As the account of this dinner was written several years later after the publishing of Dracula, one would expect Stoker to have mentioned Vambry's role, assuming he had one. Stoker notes the Hungarian was full of experiences about a trip to Central Asia, fascinating to hear. Surely a discussion about the atrocities of Vlad the Impaler would have been as fascinating had it occurred. Also significant is that this meeting took place in April 1890, before Stoker went to Whitby and read Wilkinson's book. As for the second encounter, Stoker provides even less information. We saw him again 2 years later, records Stoker, when he was being given a degree at the Trecentenary of Dublin University. He soared above all the speakers, making one of the finest speeches I've ever heard. The only comment about the subject matter of the talk was that Vambry spoke loudly against Russian aggression, nothing about Dracula. By this time, Stoker's novel was well underway. He was already using the name Dracula for his vampire. The conviction that Stoker gleaned information from the Hungarians seems to be the residue of theories about Stoker's sources before the discovery of his notes. As early as 1962, Ludlam was making the claim that Bram sought the help of Arminius Vambry in Budapest, and that Vambry was able to report the Impaler, who had won his name for obvious reasons, was spoken of for centuries after as the most clearest and most cunning, as well as the bravest of the sons of the land beyond the forest. Floresco and McNally commented the connection in 1972. These two men, Stoker and Vambry, dined together. During the course of their conversation, Bram was impressed by the professor's stories about Dracula the Impaler. After Vambry returned to Budapest, Bram wrote to him requesting more details about the notorious 15th century prince and the land he lived in. The only fact we have is that they dined together. Stoker makes no reference to Vambry in his working papers. No documented evidence exists that Vambry gave Stoker any information about Vlad, or for that matter, about vampires. Yet, keep encountering statements to the contrary. Supporters of the Stoker-Vambry link go on to his novel for textual evidence, claiming that what Vambry told Stoker is revealed through what Arminius, Van Helsing's friend, tells Van Helsing. Van Helsing, the argument goes, is Stoker's alter ego, and the insertion of Arminius is the author's tribute to Vambry, or, as Foresco and McNally speculate, Stoker's way of acknowledging his debt, and showing what information and conclusions the professor had passed on to Stoker. But surely the mere inclusion of the name provides no such thing. After all, Dracula contains many names drawn from the author's friends and acquaintances. The name Harker, for example, most likely came from one of the workers at Lyceum, while Swales was taken from a tombstone that Stoker noted in Whitby. Since the authority on Dracula in the novel would need to be foreign, someone acquainted with the Dutch Professor Van Helsing, whose name was better to use than Arminius, Vambry, whom he had briefly met. But let us assume that what Arminius tells Van Helsing is an echo of what Vambry told Stoker. What exactly does he say? I have asked my friend Arminius of Budapest University to make his record, and from all the means that are, he tells me of what has been. He must indeed have been that voivode Dracula who won his name against the Turks over the great river and the very frontier of Turkey. If it be so, then he was no common man. For in that time and for centuries after, he was spoken of as the cleverest and most cunning, as well as the bravest of the sons of the land beyond the forest. The Draculas were, says Arminius, a great and noble race, though now and again were scions who were held by their Corvals to have had dealings with the evil. They learned his secrets in the Scholomance, among the mountains, over Lake Hermanstalt, where the devil claims the 10th soldier as his due. In the records are such words as Stragokia, witch, Ordog, and Pokol, Satan, and hell. And in one manuscript, this very Dracula is spoken of as vampire, which is all understood too well. All this vital information can be traced to Stoker's own notes and sources. Wilkinson, as we have seen, writes about Dracula and the Turks, as well as the voivode's courage and cunning. The Land Beyond the Forest was the heading of the chapter in Charles Bonner's book on Transylvania, one of Stoker's known sources, as well as the title of a book by Emily Gerard, whose article Transylvanian Superstitions we know that Stoker read. The information about the Scholomance comes almost verbatim from Gerald's article. The term Stragoikia, Ordog, and Pokol are listed in Stoker's notes as having come from Mygarland in 1881, and Vampire was the name that Stoker originally intended to give his count. Nothing remains to have come from Vambry. Arminius makes his second appearance in the text as Van Helsing reports on Dracula to the band of vampire hunters. As I learned from the researchers of my friend Arminius of Budapest, he was in life a most wonderful man. While he goes on to comment on his mighty brain and learned beyond compare, and that heart that knew no fear or remorse, Arminius says nothing about his reputation as the Impaler, certainly his most memorable characteristic. While the inclusion of the name of Arminius can be seen in Stoker's tribute to Vambry, there is no evidence the Hungarian provided Stoker with any information about Dracula. Just wanted to see how much time we had and how much longer this goes on for. So yeah, we got about 10 minutes. I think I can get through this. One result of all this is that readers, accepting these hypotheses as fact, begin to look at the novel for corroborating evidence. First, there is the assumption that Stoker drew his physical description of Count Dracula from either a woodcut portrait in the Bamberg pamphlet or from a printed account of Vlad's physical appearance. For example, in his narration for a recent television documentary, Christopher Frayling states that the woodcut certainly provided Stoker with the physical descriptions of Count Dracula. It might also be tempting to deduce that Stoker had access to the following descriptions of Vlad provided by a 15th century papal legate who had met the voivode. He was not very tall, but stocky and strong, with a cold and terrible appearance, a strong aquiline nose, swollen nostrils, a thin and reddish face in which were very long eyelashes framed large, wide-open green eyes. The bushy black eyebrows made them appear threatening. However, anyone familiar with 19th century Gothic literature knows that many of the features of Vlad described in the legate's account, such as the bushy eyebrows and the aquiline nose, had become by Stoker's mind common conventions in Gothic fiction. As for Count Dracula's eyebrows almost meeting over the nose, Stoker records in his notes that this came from Baron Gould's The Book of Werewolves. Though the popular piece of speculation began as early as 1956, that in creating Renfield, Stoker seems to have adapted the legend about Vlad's penchant for impaling mice while he was a prisoner in Hungary. Also, Nandris connects the tradition about Vlad impaling birds, saying is developed in Bram Stoker's Dracula. This reappears several years later in Farson's biography of Stoker and is extended to Renfield. There is a story that Vlad bribed his guards to bring him small birds which he would mutilate and then impale on sticks in neat rows. If true, this was echoed by Stoker in his powerful characterization of the lunatic Renfield, who caught flies to feed spiders to feed birds which he devoured himself. Equally far-fetched is the claim that Vlad's fondness of impaling his victims was Stoker's inspiration for his method of destroying the vampire, the use of a wooden stake. According to Glut, Vlad's preference for impaling his victims, a method for destroying vampires, further inflamed Stoker's imagination, while the travel guide, Eastern Europe on a Shoestring, claims that Vlad inspired the tale of Count Dracula by his habit of impaling his enemies on stakes. This connection of impalement to the staking of vampires is misleading and overlooks three facts: that Bram Stoker had planned on writing a vampire novel before he ever came across the name of Dracula. There is no definitive proof that Stoker knew anything about Vlad's fondness for impalement, and that the staking of vampires was a well-established motif in both folklore and earlier Gothic fiction, long before Dracula. Another consequence of the insistence on connections to two Draculas is the temptation to criticize Stoker for inaccurate history. Why, some ask, did he make Dracula a Transylvanian count rather than a Wallachian voivode? Why was his castle situated in the Borgo Pass instead of Ponari? Why is the Count Dracula a boyar, a member of nobility which Vlad continuously struggled with? Why does Stoker make Dracula a Setskliv, descended from Attila the Hun, when the real Dracula was Wallachian of the Barsov family? There's a very simple answer to this question. Vlad Tepes is Vlad Tepes, while Count Dracula is Count Dracula. Considering the preposterous conclusions that the premise behind such questions have generated, a closer look seems warranted. How much did Bram Stoker know about the historical Dracula? There's no doubt that the material was available, but how meticulous a researcher was Stoker? We know he had read and took notes from a number of books and articles, and that some of his material found its way into his novel almost verbatim, but his research seems to have been haphazard rather than scholarly. What he used as is, errors and confusions included. That his rendering of historical and geographical data is fragmented and at times erroneous can be explained by the fact that Stoker seemed content to combine bits and pieces of information from his sources without any concern for accuracy. After all, Stoker was writing a Gothic novel, not a historical treatise, and he was writing Dracula in his spare time, of which I doubt he had much. He may very well have found more material about the historical Dracula had he had the time to look for it. But in the absence of any proof to the contrary, I'm not convinced that he did. There's no conclusive evidence that he gleaned any information on Vlad from Vanbury, material at the British Museum, or from anywhere else except the one book he found in Whitby by William Wilkinson. I have other reasons for taking this conclusion. Let us assume for argument's sake that he did learn more from Vanbury, that he did conduct research on the historical Dracula beyond Wilkinson. Why then is Count Dracula in the novel never referred to as Vlad or the Impaler? Why are there no references to his atrocities? Why would he have been grist for the horror writer's mill? Why is Van Helsing reduced to stating that he, Dracula, was in life a most wonderful man? And why are there no references in Stoker's working notes to him having used any other material? There are only two possible answers. Either he knew more and chose not to use it, or else he used what he used. Was Stoker so sophisticated a novelist that he deliberately suppressed material for artistic purposes? One need only consider how greedily he gobbled up and reproduced a significant amount of rather trivial information. Are we to believe he knew about Vlad's bloodthirsty activities, but decided to discard such history for his villainous count in favor of meager pickings gleaned from Wilkinson? One could argue the absence can be as important as the presence, that Stoker deliberately suppressed information in order to make his character more mysterious, or that Dracula's silence about his past is a consequence of the fact that the text denies him a narrative voice. Such interpretations are intriguing, but one must bear in mind there's a difference between interpretation and fact. As for theories about the connections between the Count and the Voivode, there are, with the exception of the link to Wilkinson, based on circumstantial evidence, some of which is quite flimsy. I do not dispute that in using the name Dracula, Stoker appropriated the sobriquet, the sobriquet of the 15th century Wallachian voivode. Nor do I deny he added bits and pieces of obscure historical details to flesh out a past for his vampire. But I do vehemently challenge the widespread view that Stoker was knowledgeable about the historical Dracula beyond what he read in Wilkinson's, and that he based his count on the life of the character Vlad. While it is true the resurgence of interest in Dracula since the early 70s is due in no small measure to the theories about such connections, the theories themselves do not withstand the test of close scrutiny. So there we go. So it turns out that Stoker really didn't know that much about that. That argument was made pretty well by that article. And you can find more information on this, as DJD mentioned earlier, on Dracula's homepage.
Yeah, Miss Miller. She seems to know what she's talking about.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll tell you, I'm a big fan of Dracula. I've read the novel. I've listened to the audiobook. You know, I think it's really interesting how Stoker chose to do the novel in letter form, in journal entries. You know, it's not a full cohesive narrative in that sense. You know, you're reading correspondences. You're reading diaries. You're reading journals. You know.
Yeah,
that article mentioned
it's definitely
has no narrative voice in the story. You're not getting much from Dracula's point of view.
It was definitely done a certain way, a certain style.
Well, you gotta have your mysterious stranger, and that's what Dracula was.
Exactly. It was, I think, it was definitely different the way other things were done at the time, too. Take that into account. I'm sure that was a big part of why it was such a hit. Because you were like, wow, this might be real. Oh, wow. Let's had all the romance, other fun bits to it. And, you know, ends up being a bestseller, timeless book. Not quite the best book, but good enough, it seems. Definitely good enough.
Well, it is a story that certainly stood the test of time and inspired countless other endeavors into the arts, you know, between films and novels, comic books, songs even, you know. One cannot forget the Monster Mash, featuring Dracula and his son.
Exactly. Possibly some anime vampires that might have videos coming out relatively soon. I don't know, go check it out.
In Monster Squad.
Oh, Almost Tactical with the super chat. Thank you very much, Almost Tactical. Much appreciated. Almost Tactical says, Almost Tactical for $5. Thank you. Says, impale a few people and they start calling you the devil. Jeez, what a king got to do to just kick back and rule? Well, you know, some argue he impaled over 100,000 people, I believe.
Yeah.
Oh, it was a lot.
That's a lot of fertilizer.
It actually scared, allegedly, the Ottomans. Yeah, I'd say you have to be pretty effective and do a lot of people.
I'm sorry, I'm exaggerating the number. It was only 80,000. 80,000 people.
Only 80,000. Yeah.
Can you imagine that though?
80,000 people through various means.
Wow.
Dude, just spike through every different part that you can, but left in such a way where they just go slow.
Well, the more
Just a
amazing
few,
thing
that's all. Just, you know, just a couple, that's all.
the more amazing thing was the length of his rule and to impale that many people in that time period.
Oh, he was very efficient. Yes.
You got that right.
Yes. Quite obsessive, as it were.
Let's see,
It is
that's
efficient,
everybody
see?
working together. How many days
Yeah.
do you think it was just like...
Oh,
Yeah,
it was
right.
just non-stop killing. Don't worry about that. It was just non-stop killing.
It had to be.
Oh, party don't stop. Like, oh, wait, we're running out of wood? Here, chop down some goddamn trees. Now let's go shove that up somebody. Enjoy that. Enjoy that
Put 'em on.
vista.
Well, you put them on their own pikes at that point.
Well, there was an instance. Dracula was known for his morbid sense of humor. After being impaled, his victims would often twitch around as they died, and according to one account, Vlad casually said, "What a great gracefulness they exhibit." In another story, when a soldier disrespectfully covered his nose because of the stench of rotting corpses, Dracula had that man impaled too.
Damn.
Well, you need to appreciate the fine bouquet.
Tread lightly around him.
Mm-hmm. And his impaling was not just a way to get rid of his enemies, it was a way of terrorizing and scaring away potential invaders as well.
Exactly.
Yes.
Imagine rolling up on that town.
Yeah, kind of like Genghis Khan.
Let's
It's
get that
a
away.
few similar tactics. I would say Vlad did that too.
No, he's not the get off my lawn type. He's
I mean, think
the
of it,
get
the
in
visual-
my lawn type.
The visual plus the odor, that's quite effective to tell people go away.
You know, Dracula also had complete control over his people to demonstrate how much they feared him. The story goes that he allegedly had a golden cup crafted and placed in the town square. The rule was that anybody could drink out of it, but it could never leave the square. At the time, an estimated 60,000 people, many of them quite poor, lived in the town. But during his entire reign, the cup was never touched.
That's saying something.
There was another story after burning down an Ottoman stronghold in 1461. Dracula allegedly presented nearly 24,000 Turkish and Bulgarian heads to officials.
Wow.
Dracula's mother's identity is unknown. As ruler of Wallachia, Vlad imposed his own moral code on the country. He was especially concerned with chastity. Many adulterous women, women who lost their virginity, and unchaste widows allegedly had their sexual organs cut out or were impaled.
Damn.
Historians believe he was married twice. The identity of his first wife is unknown, but she gave birth to his eldest son and heir, and died while Vlad was fighting against the Turks in 1462. According to legend, she threw herself off the tower into the Argus River below the castle to avoid capture by the Turks. Poverty was another concern of Dracula's, and an oral folk history says he came up with a brutal solution for eliminating the numerous poor vagabonds and cripples. One night he allegedly invited the poor for a feast. While they ate and drank into the night, he locked the doors and set the hall on fire.
Damn. One mean son of a bitch.
Yeah.
It is reported that he once impaled 20,000 people in a single day. In 1462, after fleeing the Ottoman advance, he left a forest of the impaled in his wake, made mostly up of prisoners of war.
Damn, can you imagine
No.
20,000 people? The look in their eyes when they start seeing that that's their fate. They're all going on sticks.
Terrific.
Is this the future of California? I don't know.
Yeah, the estimate is between 80 and 100,000 people that he killed. The most brutal enemy the Ottoman Empire ever faced. But in Romania, he's a national hero and revered. His cruelty is acknowledged, but it was seen as necessary at the time to maintain his power and repel his enemies. Dracula died in battle while fighting the Turks. His body was reportedly buried in a cemetery in Snagov Monastery, but his remains have never been found. Some suggested that Vlad may be buried in Komana Monastery, which is near where he was killed. Yeah, so there we go. And that actually brings us up to the end of the night, everybody.
I went by fast.
Yeah, they do. It's a fast hour.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope you did enjoy our talk about Vlad the Impaler. I actually was
Really
going
fun,
to do
I'll
this
tell
as
you
a
that
topic
much.
for a short video, But there's so much to it. I mean, if I was going to do a short video about it, it'd be 25 minutes. So that's why I said, let's save it. Let's really milk it. Let's really get down into the details and do, a full hour on it. And I think we've got plenty here to talk about. I think it was pretty eye-opening as we see the comparison between the fictional Dracula and the real Dracula. We talked about what Stoker knew, what he didn't know, what was incorporated into his tale, and how in some cases he may have known possibly more than we think he did. Or maybe he didn't know that much at all. But I do appreciate you all being here tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in. I want to thank you guys for being here day after day, night after night as we delve into the world of the weird. I want to say thank you to Almost Tactical for your generous super chat. Much appreciated. Never expected, but always appreciated. Thank you very much. I'd like to say thank you to my panel for being here, guys. Thank you for tuning in, hanging out. It's not the same show without you. Thank you all so much. And as we do here, this has been the Creepy Little Book Live, and you've been listening to High Strangeness, the #1 late night paranormal podcast on YouTube. I've been your host, Pete. With me tonight, the Adorable the Horrible, DJ D of the DJ D Show, and Tina Tomaszewski. And before we go, I would like to remind you to check out the description of this video for our sponsors link, preparewithpeter.com. That will take you right to my Patriot Supply where you can save 40% on these products. And I recommend that you do build an emergency food supply. It's not a bad thing to do. Likewise, you'll find a link to my Twitter and my email if you want to get a hold of me. I'm real easy to reach out to. I'm always open to suggestions for show topics. So if you've got something that's been itching your mind and you want us to get into it, definitely drop me a line and let me know. You'll also find a link to the Teespring store where we've got a lot of great merchandise there to check out. So please go ahead and pick up something for you, get a little bang for your buck, and help support the show. Likewise, there's a link to my Patreon. I want to say thank you to all my Patreon supporters who have stuck with me for so long and helped really fund this show. Thank you so much. And if you're in a position to become a Patreon supporter for just $1 a month, that's a quarter a week. A quarter a week for 24 hours of live content every month. If you think it's worth it, then I hope you would consider supporting us on Patreon. You will also find links to everybody's channel down below, so don't forget to subscribe to everybody on the panel tonight. I want to thank you all for being here. I've been your host, Pete. With me tonight for Adorable the Horrible, DJ D, and Tina Tomaszewski. Please subscribe and follow them on Twitter and the like. Until tomorrow night, everybody, stay creeped out.
departure. Landing gear retracted. Orbital flight engaged.
Core Dynamics Bravo Alpha November. Commencing automated flight control. Team, please observe docking protocols. Access granted. Proceed to landing pad 06.
Landing gear deployed.